Hello, everyone. This is BigReed with another episode of Gaming's Lost Memories. This is episode 31, and today we are going to be discussing Cyberpunk 2077 on the Nintendo Switch 2. And the reason why I kind of wanted to talk about this was several reasons. So, obviously, the Switch 2 just launched, and you had your launch games, you had some enhancements. Nintendo's been keeping their focus on any of the Switch 1 games that were, still in development around the time of the Switch 2 launch, having a Switch 2 version as well. Nintendo's also been going back and ensuring that there's updates, there's Switch 2 updates for really popular Switch 1 games, which has also been nice. So like if a game releases, there's a lot of times two different versions. Sometimes there's a free upgrade. Sometimes it's $10. Another game soon we'll talk about, Zelda. Has the Switch 2 upgrade. But what has also been nice is one of the biggest role playing games in the last decade, from the developer of Witcher 3. Which is also one of the biggest role playing games ever. And I think that game has sold over 50 million copies, which is just absolutely bonkers. But, a completely different. It's like a 180 from what they went from. So you're coming from The Witcher, which is, elves, monsters, magic, fantasy. Nobody's taking showers. I'm not big into the fantasy setting. Like, I can watch the Lord of the Rings movies, and I'm like, I can see this is good. But then I'll play a game like Dragon Age Origins, and I'm like, everybody has yellow teeth, which is fine because obviously you're not brushing your teeth, in this type of setting. But I'm just like, everything's brown and gross, and everybody looks smelly. Well, Cyberpunk is like the opposite. It's super city based, future based. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it too was to not only cover the launch on the Switch 2, to cover a little bit of the game's initial announcement and release. Because even though, it's only been 5 years, the way that the gaming community views Cyberpunk 2077 is such a stark difference, from the launch until now, and for good reason. It had a less than stellar launch. But the other thing too, I know artificial intelligence is going to replace us all, and the world's going to fall apart. But I have always enjoyed science fiction stories, and for a long time, there was a video game series that I felt encapsulated probably what our future would look like as a species. But I think Cyberpunk has taken the reins of that, and I would like to talk about that a little bit. So we'll kind of start off with Cyberpunk 2077. What is it? So it's an action-based role-playing game similar to The Witcher 3, where you have like a giant map, but this time it's in a city. The city is, heavily influenced by cyberpunk, big screens, futuristic, but it's a realistic aspect to the future, in my opinion. So I've lived long enough now that I've seen, technological breakthroughs. I've watched the internet kind of, come out of nowhere, and I've listened. I barely understand the internet now, but I definitely didn't understand, when it came out. And I remember, being a young kid and thinking Windows 95 was the internet. The concept of the internet, I just didn't understand. And it's like, no, Windows is an operating system that runs a personal computer. You still need to, have a modem that connects to a data connection that, I was like, I don't get this. I don't quite understand it. I think my mother got our first computer when I was 17. And that was like my foray into just learning about the internet. Even when we got the computer, I was like, holy crap, we got a computer. And then we didn't have the internet, and I was like, I don't quite understand this. But, through the 70s, 80s, I mean, even before this, before those times, everybody kind of wanted to predict what they thought the future was going to look like. And sometimes it's almost sterile where it's like, man, we're not even going to have cars. Like, cars are going to be flying. There's going to be instant teleportation. And it's 2025 now. And I just can't see that or imagine that. And even with artificial intelligence, I think there are going to be large changes coming in the future, but I don't know if we're going to see like a massively influential change outside of, current companies laying everybody off and trying to do the bare minimum to operate their business and just utilizing art. I think there is going to be a bubble where everybody, like all companies, and you know what's funny? So just a major theme of Cyberpunk 2077 is like, you know, corporations, their influence on people, and basically the corporations will control everything. And that has been done in, I want to say like RoboCop was another good example. There's a few other movies that have kind of portrayed, corporations just running everything in the future. And it does feel like that's pretty much already happening and will also continue to happen in the future. Oh my gosh, there's a scene in, oh my gosh, a Sylvester Stallone movie. I cannot remember it off the top of my head right now. It's one of my, like, I want to say favorites. Like, if it's on, I'm going to watch it. Basically, he's frozen. It goes into the future. I cannot remember what it's called. But I remember he's with the mayor, and he goes to this, like, big fancy dinner, right? And it's hosted by Taco Bell, but it was so funny because, like, they're all dressed in, like, their futuristic fancy clothes. And, they're sitting down and there's like, 3 different forks, 3 different knives, and like it's like a really formal dinner. And then they start serving Taco Bell. And I just thought that was kind of funny. Like, I think that's the type of stuff that's going to be happening. But yeah, being anti-corporation, and one of the characters basically represents a large theme and a large part of Cyberpunk 2077. But let's go back and talk about kind of the announcement and the launch of the game, because, the idea of this podcast, Gaming's Lost Memories, was kind of telling stories and reminders. And we're going to get, as I do this, I've been kind of focusing on, modern games, going back to games, and like talking about like the influences that have impacted these games. But even in a short 5 years, and okay, so let's start here because I'm bouncing all around because I'm excited. I want to say Cyberpunk 2077 was announced it was 2012 or 2013. This was when E3 still existed. So another lost memory, E3 doesn't exist anymore. So, the only way before the internet that you used to get information was they would have this gigantic electronics expo, and, Nintendo, Sony, Sega, Microsoft, like all of these companies would go, and all of the developers and publishers as well. They would go, but you would show off new games, new hardware. People would get hands-on previews. There was a lot of excitement because, the only way to kind of get that information, with the internet being essentially in its infancy, because even before, it's tough to say when the internet got popular. Maybe 95 to 2000, somewhere in there. Like you could get a 56K modem. There were some websites, but somewhere in there is when it kind of like started. So you could still get information there, but it wasn't instant and it wasn't constant, and there weren't leaks constantly happening where, a company now might have a new console or a new video game, and it will essentially leak with all of the information out there. It's just so impossible. It's so quick. As soon as it gets out there, it just travels so far, so quick. Like everybody has a computer in their pocket now, but it used to be different. My main way of getting, news was magazines. So either Nintendo Power, Game Informer. There was another one that kind of covered everything as well. Cannot remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's just like, the Electronics Expo, E3, used to be like the thing where companies would go, and then eventually like Nintendo's like, I'm not going anymore. And, just due to the decline where it's not really worth it because at this point, the last 8 years or so of E3, it was kind of detrimental to businesses for them to go and like show their products because it wouldn't be like a big surprise, or it wouldn't be big enough of a reveal because it's impossible to keep secrets. Like as soon as you are essentially working on a game and it's becoming a finished product, like everybody kind of knows it's happening. So it's very hard to have these big surprises, and then when the big reveals and big surprises weren't surprising and amazing enough, everybody'd be like, "Oh, their E3 press conference sucked," and they would make like funny memes and videos, and like, "Hey, look how embarrassing Nintendo did this year with Wii Music," and it's just like it became detrimental. So I remember specifically, with the Nintendo Switch and Nintendo focusing solely on like, hey, we're going to have Nintendo Directs to kind of just talk about our own products. And I think that is the most effective and best way right now. I think with a lot of the controllables that Nintendo has implemented, even though it's new and it's different and they're kind of playing their cards, closer to the vest, I think that's kind of how it has to go. But when Cyberpunk was announced, it won like hundreds of awards for most interesting, best. Like, this is going to be the hottest new game. Like, you could feel it. It reminds me of Skyrim, and there haven't been too many games, like new games, where you see it and it's announced and you're like, oh, you can tell just by looking at it, this is going to be a quality product. And the hype is real. Like, I know that's kind of like a quote and a joke and everything like that. The hype is real, but you could feel it. And Cyberpunk was like that. Now, here's the tricky part with this time frame and consoles and PCs. So PCs are, not only are they more powerful, but they're modular. So, you can have a PC and then buy a new graphics card and have a new processor, pretty frequently and have more power to run games. So I understand why a lot of third-party games are going to be on PC and be on consoles, but the Xbox 360 and the PS3 era lasted way too long. 10 years was too long. The first 5 years was glorious. My Xbox 360, it's one of my favorite times in the game industry. Just everything kind of lined up perfectly for me to experience so many really good games and like the internet, matchmaking, like so many. I really do miss that time, and I probably should give that era a little bit more love because I thought it was great. But then you have the PS4 and Xbox One come out, and those lasted really long, and like the hardware was too old. So now we're kind of where we're at with the PS5, the PS5 Pro, the Xbox. Consoles are definitely powerful enough to run pretty much anything that they need to run effectively, to where I think the gap is pretty low unless you're counting, in terms of cost efficiency too. Like, let's just throw that out there. Like, if you have a PC and you spent, $3,000 on it, well, you can get a PlayStation for like $400 that can run the game pretty darn close. So it's like, is it really, that different of experience? And I would say at this time with those two comparisons, I would say no. But with the Switch 2, the answer is going to be yes. But it's part of also the reason why I want to talk about Cyberpunk so much. But the hype was unbelievable for this game. Now, not only did they have to release it on PC, but they also had to release it on the PS4 and Xbox One. But by 2020, they were at end of life with the PlayStation 5 coming out. And that was such a huge market for the Cyberpunk developers. And they were making the game so long. Like, it was announced, like, I want to say 2016-ish is when they ramped up development. So the game was basically, I want to say, in development for like 8+ years before it even hit release. So it's worth noting that the release of Cyberpunk, it sold extremely well. I want to say it's something crazy. I think the game has sold like 25 million copies so far. I want to know if that's actually like worth looking up right now, but I think it sold something crazy like 12 million copies at launch. Actually, I want to see if So hold on here. And I apologize about this delay, but I want to have the rough sales. So I'm seeing 25 million copies, but I am also using a search engine. Nope. Okay. We're looking. There we go. Okay. So it's about a year old, but we're seeing 30 million copies. So that's pretty good. So I want to say like 10 to 12 million of them were at launch, and the internet was not kind to the performance problems that this game was having. And it's also part of the reason why I never really like forced myself to play it. Where there's like some games where you're like, "Hey," and I might throw like The Last of Us in there for this. It's like it's a game where I can see that it's really good, but there's a lot about it that I don't like, but I need to at least like play through it one time, to kind of like check the box, so to speak. But at the time, especially with the launch and like the hardware issues, just the overall kind of view of the game, I was like, this isn't something, that I need to kind of get in front of a PlayStation or try to download it on PC and make this happen. Plus, basically since the Switch came out, that has been my primary console. So the launch on the Switch 2 was very intriguing to me. And the reason why this is very, very important and something that I wanted to discuss, just the overall quality of the product first and foremost. We'll start there, and then we'll kind of talk about like a little bit of the story and kind of like artificial intelligence. Is somehow they got The Witcher 3 running on the original Switch. And that's where I played it. I think I had a copy on maybe the Xbox. No, it would have been on the PlayStation. I have to actually look. But long story short, it had no business running on the original Switch hardware. And I'll be danged if they didn't squeeze that thing all in a cartridge. I believe it had a day one patch or something like that for performance. But they released the game, and it was a quality port that was significantly better than it deserved to be, because I can't even imagine how difficult it was getting that thing to run on the Switch. And even when I played it, like the game was there, it was still a good game, but you could see where it was like running at 540p in handheld mode and like struggling along. So I was very intrigued with the Switch 2 of being able to play some games that I had been waiting to play, like Zelda Tears of the Kingdoms, which we'll cover as well on another podcast. But seeing Cyberpunk 2 release, with the latest patch, with the DLC, I was like, oh, okay. And with how well they handled the Witcher 3 port, I was very intrigued by this. This is by far the best third-party game on the Switch 2. And I understand, it's a 5-year-old game, blah, blah, blah. If you haven't played it, or if you're just a fan of it and you want to have like a portable version of it, or you have the Switch 2 and you're looking for something, to replay or anything like that, it is a very quality product. So my experience, I believe I ran it for performance mode. I played the entire game pretty much in handheld mode, which is my favorite mode. It's just, at this point in my life, and I'll probably cover this in the Switch 2 review that I do as well, at this point in my life, having a console that I can pick up and take anywhere and play in bursts, and being able to play in bursts is really important for me at this point. Like, I used to be able to sit down and have nothing to do and play, a game or a story-based game for a few hours at a time. I've definitely played a lot of multiplayer games, but I never really been like, oh my gosh, hey, I'm going to spend, 3 months straight playing Call of Duty. I can see the fun in that, but I do prefer single player games. I prefer RPGs. I prefer games like Zelda. Give me bosses to fight, things to collect, places to explore. I really like that about video games. But the Switch 2 and the ability to press the power button and it goes in sleep mode. I don't think there's enough appreciation for how incredible sleep mode is on the Nintendo portables, all the way back to the DS, to the 3DS, to the Switch 2. It is incredible to have a game like Cyberpunk 2077 and to be like, shooting and in a mission and exploring a gigantic freaking city and to just press a little button and be like, oh, I got something to take care of, you know, and then in 2 hours, press the button and like your game's right there. That there is just really something to that. And the game was announced also with Elden Ring, which is a game that I played on the Xbox, but it's just too hard for me to sit down and play on a console. With neck surgery, hip surgery, sitting down, like it's just easier to be able to like pick up and move and go and everything. But Elden Ring already got pushed back due to performance issues because it was also, it was either playable or they had it running on some Switch 2s and they were like, hey, here it is. And with how good of a developer, and with how good the Soulsborne series is, to have a lackluster port where I'm telling you, it's probably going to come out on Switch 2 and sell at least like 1 million plus copies. Like you want it to just perform well. It's not, the game's huge and open world and I understand all of that, but like, even if you need to have it running at 720p at 60 frames per second or, 1080p at, 30 frames per second stable, you got to be able to do that in 2025. And even with Cyberpunk, I'm starting to have less of a tolerance for games launching incomplete or launching broken and then just like being fixed, because if you would have if Cyberpunk was held to the standard of which it launched in, it's a mediocre game. Like if you can't have massive performance issues in the game to just like run like crap and the gameplay to be bad and everything to be broken and expect that to be seen as a quality product and get, high ratings and high reviews and everything. And seeing Elden Ring, and thank God they pushed it back, because honestly, like apparently it was running like, less than 30 frames per second, which it's tough to say. It's like, I want to say, well, that's not an issue if there's some dips, but if it was running at 60 frames per second and then it was dipping down to 30 in some areas where there's like, a bunch of stuff going on, that's different, as opposed to, hey, it's running at like 15 frames per second at like less than 720p. It's like, yo, you got to fix that, because the Switch 2 is definitely more than capable. And, with Cyberpunk 2077, it showcases that it's more than capable for like pretty much any game that's released right now. Now, one thing I will say is I understand, with like Borderlands 4, or big games that will be being developed or will be being launched, they're going to have to, have a section of their team dedicated to working with the Switch 2 hardware, because you're not just going to make it on PC and then just like easily port things over. I think that laziness in terms of development just kind of needs to stop as well. And, it also kind of happened with Nintendo a little bit. So focusing on the Switch hardware, like I think I did an early podcast with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, just the games were just so rough in the beginning. And then, I fired up on the Switch 2 where they have the frame rate unlocked, and it just, like, it doesn't look great. Like, stylistically and graphically, it definitely doesn't compare to, any games in the modern era. But it runs well, where before it just ran like just horrible. So my patience for bad development, bad games, laziness, cutting corners, like, when you're developing this game and when you're getting close to launch, if the game is ready or if the game is not ready. And I think with Cyberpunk in particular, it got delayed several times. And, this is a company where there's investors, there's people waiting, there's people getting excited, and they're like, hey, you got to release this game, And it was taking significantly more manpower and significantly more time than they anticipated. So after like the third or fourth, as a CEO, I understand where like you have a core product and you're hyping everyone up, and now it's been in development for 8 years and you've delayed it 3 times already. You're just like, yo, we just got to release this product. But I don't think you should do that. And there's always a quote that gets released out there. I don't even think Shiggy ever said it, but it's like, you know, essentially, you know, delaying a delayed game can eventually be good, where a bad game is bad forever. And that's a little bit different now because you can release patches and everything like that. But people remember this type of stuff, and if you just release a mediocre game that like clearly wasn't finished and needed more development time, those games just die and they lose a lot of money, and then the video game industry just changes because that's how business works. It's like Anthem. It's another great example of just a game that had a cool concept and just wasn't finished, and they released it and it just died and everybody lost a lot of money and people got fired. And it's like that laziness just can't exist in the industry. Saying all of that, Cyberpunk, you know, the launch of it and the like issues and everything kind of are a lost memory, because when I was like looking things up about, the different endings and, just tips and tricks on builds and everything like that, with the character and how to level them up and like where to find cool things, what weapons like people like playing with if I haven't found them yet, so I could go find them. You wouldn't remember or realize that, hey, this was a game that launched incompletely, and like there was class action lawsuits over this where they had to spend millions of dollars to settle it because it was like, what you showed us didn't match the final product. And now it's like people really love this game. 30 million copies sold, I think 8 million copies for the DLC. So like not only is this a wildly successful game, but what's so cool is they were able to just constantly work on it and fix it and update it and rebuild that trust in the community, where it has a sequel announced, which I would definitely be interested in. But the product that came to the Switch 2, if all third-party ports meet this type of quality minimum, I will be a happy camper, and the Switch 2 can be my main console for, years to come. Like if I can get Elden Ring, running at this type of quality, I will be happy. If third-party games like Borderlands 4, which also got delayed, launches to this type of quality, I will be super happy. I ran it in performance mode in the tablet mode pretty much the whole time. And I honestly, the only thing I believe I noticed, because keep in mind, like I didn't really play and experience, is it feels like with it being such a big city, there were parts and times where I feel like there could have been more NPCs or maybe more cars on the streets, like driving around and stuff. But I don't think I ever had a performance dip of less than 30 frames per second. Like it always ran, so it could have even been a higher frame rate because it always looked smooth, looked gorgeous, high resolution. Like I didn't get any weird textural issues. I didn't get any weird glitches where like things weren't loading. I would go into a mission where I'm sneaking around and being stealthy, or, sadly a whole firefight happens and there's just hundreds of things being displayed that can be interacted with. And I never incurred any issues. And the game is like it has that cyberpunk neon lights, futuristic city vibes, which for science fiction, like I was all about. But the reason I also like the science fiction approach that they took is it's also kind of like grungy and realistic. Cars exist. Yes, there's an entire quest line, which was really good with a Delamain, I think his name is. There's like an entire artificial intelligence that runs an entire cab company, essentially. And like, you can order a cab and, get the special treatment, get a bulletproof cab, and it'll drive you around. And like, you have this fully functional artificial intelligence program / guy that is... And this is where AI gets kind of interesting, because it's like it is a being, And there's AIs that separate from that main AI that are like went and became their own thing, and like the cars start like driving away because it's like I could not go back and be a part of this larger AI program because I have sent I'm a sentient being essentially. And that's kind of interesting. It really focuses in on like what makes us human and what makes a person, and eventually what's going to differentiate. What's the difference between, okay, a great example. If I'm able to upload your entire personality and take anything that you've ever said and take all of your thoughts and take any art you've ever created, anytime you've ever talked or made jokes, take all of your facial expressions, take everything that makes you you, and I just dump it into like an AI, like a chat GPT or something like that, and interact with it. Is that different from you? I would say right now, where we are with artificial intelligence, the answer is probably yes. I think everybody's been tricked with AI and everything like that at this point, but you can see the difference. You can tell the difference. You can see it's pulling from a limited source now, but in the future, what really will be the difference between your personality uploaded into an artificial intelligence program versus you? If you die and your family misses you so much and they decide to, download your brain into an AI, or download your everything you've ever done in your life and uploaded it into an AI program and talk to it, is it different? And I think that's kind of what we're experiencing. People are dating artificial intelligence. They're talking with it. It's talking back to them, and like it's not perfect, but it's kind of meeting those human needs that we have of companionship or whatever. So is there a difference between you and an artificial intelligence version of you? And I do think, so it's 2025 now, by 2077, are children of that era going to feel that? Or, I mean, Jesus, even as a parent, like if you lose a child and you download their personality into a robot or a computer screen, is that still your child? I really do think that humanity in general, we're going to experience something like that where we're going to have to answer tough questions. And so even if as a species we say, hey, that's not you, there's a soul or there's an it factor that makes you different. Are people going to care? If they can upload a deceased loved one into this type of program and still talk to them, is that going to be enough? Or is that going to be really messed up? I mean, honestly, I don't know, but that's kind of like, where we're dipping our toes into right now. And I thought Cyberpunk handled that really well with a few of the quest lines, and just kind of like putting that out there of like, is an engram that's downloaded from a consciousness, is it that person? Man, that's a tough one, because you would think no, because that person, if they were here, would continue living their life and continue doing new things. And ultimately, this thing in its current state of 2025, it's just going to regurgitate things that you've already done and already said. It can't come up with new things, or can it? Will it match the personality? Like, if you program it like, hey, I miss my mom. Can you have my mother, talk to me and say she baked cookies? Well, you might have had a rough situation with your mom growing up, but she never baked you cookies or said she loves you. But now she does. So it's like, is that her? Or are you just rewriting that so that way you can feel better and get that human connection that you couldn't get from the real human? Man, that's going to be tough. So the series that I mentioned earlier that I thought was going to represent how we're going to view technology was Mass Effect. And there was something called, I think it's an Omni tool is what it's called in game. But it was essentially like all the functionality of a cell phone, the internet, scanning everything all in a tool that was digital, kind of like on your arm. and that's how you communicate. You could literally like scan something, and it would tell you what the properties are. You could, go up to a computer and scan it, and it would pull all the data off of it. There's an intranet and an extranet. And funny enough, because Mass Effect is basically about like, what if AI slash, machine beings take over? Do they have souls? But what happens when they take over and, all organic life is exterminated? And it's about a cycle that, essentially organic beings always create AI in every cycle, and the AI always ends up killing us. So these crazy beings called the Reapers come out and kill and harvest all organic life to preserve, and they create like more Reapers, which are like these giant squid-like alien machine beings. So my point here is I used to think that was probably where the technology of the future would go. Because I think it's very clear that with cell phones, they're not going to change anytime soon. We probably got another decade of like the, foldable technology kind of coming out. But we're already kind of experimenting with wearables. And there's no wearables that are really like mass market. You go out and everybody has a cell phone, but not everybody's going to have a virtual reality or a meta. Like the battery life's bad. We're not there yet. But you can kind of see that it's going to migrate. To be more efficient, it has to migrate in some type of wearable technology. There has to be a way for quicker information transmission other than looking at a screen at one thing at a time and reading that one thing at a time. Like there's got to be a quicker way to kind of get that information to you. And I think it's going to be in a wearable capacity eventually. So I used to think that Mass Effect had like the best representation of what the future will probably hold. And now keep in mind, it's different. In Mass Effect, we got on Mars or whatever, and they found a bunch of, alien technology that instantly essentially like jumped our technology capabilities as a species by like 300 or 400 years. So that's kind of why it's like a little bit different, and they can, make it a little bit more futuristic. But Cyberpunk, I feel like it's probably how it's going to be. And I think it's going to be scary because you already see it now, like cosmetically, right? You already have people getting, they're changing their faces to look more younger. They're using quote unquote biohacks to, there's hair transplant, drugs for men. It's like basically like, hey, you can keep your hair. Like, oh, you're getting old. Well, you don't have to look or feel old. You can take testosterone. You can take these supplements that keep your hair. You can go and actually get your hair put back in. You know what I mean? And you'll have like a young guy's hair, even though all your hair was falling out like a year ago. For women, it's, modifying like their beauty standards of, filler, injection, weight loss drugs for everybody, right? Like, oh, you don't have to feel hungry. Just take this shot every month or every week or whatever it is, and you'll lose 30 pounds. And you already have people like, it's like, what would their face really look like? Like every celebrity has basically done, testosterone, hair transplants, injections in the face to, get rid of wrinkles. So this is already happening. Another great example, which is kind of weird, is like, hey, you want to be 3 to 4 inches taller? Well, they can break your legs and let them heal and make you longer. It's just crazy, right? But Cyberpunk handles that in a way where it's like, hey, we figured out the technology. You can go and have ocular implants implanted into your eyes to, basically have like that wearable technology that I was talking about in your eyes. You can scan things, you can do this, you can do that, even, weapons. That's where it gets a little scary, is like the weaponized versions. It's like, okay, well, you can have these swords that basically pop out of your arms. You can like hack and slice people up. And there's even a faction, I forget what they're called, but there's a faction in Cyberpunk where like they went way too far. So, they have like 5 red lenses where their eyes were. They just had their eyes freaking scooped out, and like that's how they visually see now. Like they don't even have eyes. They don't even see through their eyes. It's not an enhancement. It's like, hey, I scooped half of my face out, and that's how I view it, and I'm just gonna take drugs and like, be crazy. So there's definitely be people that take it too far, because I think, with corporations especially in Cyberpunk, it's like we want to control everything, we want to do everything, you know. We're going to allow people to make these choices, and you know, in the city, like the police can't even keep up with the amount of crime and everything that's happening. So it's just like, you know, what's the point? And plus, you know, you might have somebody that doesn't have a lot of modifications, and then some crazy guy with sword arms comes flying at you and hacks somebody up. You know, or even weirder, there's a great, you know, boss fight of just a completely hateable character who, it's like RoboCop basically. He's like a 9 foot tall security guard with like a human face who just talks like a human, acts like a human, but he's just literally a death machine. So, having played and completed Cyberpunk, I really do think that's where our future is going to look like. Where you're going to have cars, you're going to have, you know, probably cell phones or something equivalent to cell phone technology. But the biggest difference is artificial intelligence is going to be absolutely huge. Cities are going to be fully connected with cameras, everything everywhere. Like there's going to be biochipping. I believe all of that, you know, is just on its way. Because if it has, if it's impactful enough and has enough of an upside, I do believe, maybe not myself, but I do believe that people will fully give up any type of privacy or anything like that, any type of individuality or privacy, you know, to have these functionalities, you know, implanted into their life. I honestly believe that if it was safe, if you could have your cell phone, like everything a cell phone can do, just put into your brain safely, I think everybody would do it tomorrow. I honestly, I don't, even if it's like, hey, we got to fully scan your body, fully scan your brain, like, you know, you got to sign this user agreement that allows us to literally take all of your data in existence. And do you even own it? Because it feels like, you know, ownership and everything like that pretty much doesn't exist already. We're already kind of like exiting that. But I really do believe that Cyberpunk is the most realistic example of where artificial intelligence and all of this technology is going to take us. And it's kind of interesting because I want to say in the last few years, the uptick in AI and the improvements in artificial intelligence have been dramatically enhanced. So, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing, but a great example is, you know, 2 years ago you could make imagery and videos with artificial intelligence, but it was bad, honestly. Like, it was just dumb. Like, they would be like, here's Will Smith eating spaghetti, and it just looks like a crazy monster. It's just so bizarre. Like, it doesn't look like anything, really. And now it's like, hey, that's a very realistic looking. Like, it's hard to discern reality from artificial intelligence imagery at this point. I do think it sticks out like a sore thumb a lot of times. Like, another great example is there's, you know, we have a smart TV, so you'll be watching something and an advertisement pops up, and there's an advertisement for you know, a dealership, and there's two different versions where there's a male and a female version, and they're basically like talking, and but you can kind of tell where it like doesn't make sense. I was like, well, one, their voice doesn't match what they physically look like, which is interesting in and of itself. I'm sure like that's a 10-hour long discussion you could have, but I'm like, well, the voice doesn't match. Their mannerisms are weird. Like, the way they're dressed is just odd. It's like a pair of khakis and like a generic blue shirt that you'll never find ever. Like, that shirt just doesn't exist, and you're just like, huh, like, that looks weird. And then, like, you know, after watching it for like 15 seconds, I'm like, oh, that's an AI person. That's why this is so weird, because not only are you getting that uncanny valley, but it's also like, it doesn't look real. Like, you can just kind of like tell it doesn't look real. So I think that's only going to improve. I think, you know, the voices and everything, I think there's going to be a lot to figure out with artificial intelligence in that regard. But the biggest step is going to be like, what do we do with it? Because it's like, another example is like, I get so many emails, you know, on LinkedIn or just in general of artificial, like, I can tell the person who sent me this didn't write this email, and I will never reply to that email. And I think people don't like that. But it's like, wow, look how efficient I am because I can respond to my boss's email. But honestly, like if your job is just emailing stuff, then I can kind of understand like where the job security like isn't there. Like there's probably a more efficient way to get that communication across. But going back, so man, I didn't expect to take this long talking about all this, but I find it fascinating. But to sum up a couple key points here, Cyberpunk 2077 on the Switch 2 is absolutely awesome. I loved it. The storytelling, I kind of want to focus on a little bit. I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's one of those games. It reminds me of The Witcher 3 a lot, obviously, but it's one of those games where there are choices, and man, do these choices stink. Like there are quest lines where there's no right option, and it kind of reminds me of life, where like if you aren't risking much and you aren't putting yourself, out there in term like if you put yourself in situations where one of the outcomes is you get hurt in some way, not even like physically, but like, maybe you lose money, like maybe, something you wasted time, or maybe like, you get taken advantage of. If you don't put yourself in those situations, it's pretty easy to have risk management. But if you're putting yourself in these situations, you there is a risk where one of the options is not good, or you find yourself in a set of life circumstances that just so happen where like any choice you make. It reminds me of business school. It's like, hey, there's winners and losers in all business decisions, right? And like there's always going to be winners and losers. And it doesn't mean like all the losers lost, but it's like, okay, if we increase the price of a product that we are offering because we have to, a winner is, hey, our we're a winner because we're making more money off of the product. Our shareholders, we're going to generate more revenue because we increase the price. Yet some of the losers might be us as well, because we might lose customers. But at the end point, or the end user or the customer who is now paying more for the same product, they're quote unquote the loser in this. So like every business decision, and it can be different, but there are some decisions in Cyberpunk where if you don't, you really do, when you're leveling your character, there's like 5 different categories. There's fighting, driving, blah, blah, blah. If you don't level one of those like all the way up, there are some choices that you are just like locked out of, and like you won't know what it is until you kind of like get there and experience it. But some of these like choices are really hard, like where the story is not all happy. Like there's say like 3 choices or 5 choices or whatever, and it's like there's one quest line. So minor spoilers here. Like I said, I don't want to dive too much into it because it's such a game worth playing. And if you have a Switch 2 and this is your first time playing it, it is well worth it. I cannot recommend it enough. It's definitely a really good game. And I used to assign scores to games and review games and everything like that for a couple different companies, a couple different websites, whatever you want to say. And as I've gotten older, I find it more difficult to assign a score to games because I'm like, I always fell back on, should you play this? And even if I gave a game like a 7 out of 10, I'm like, yes, you should play this. Like, I understand, but maybe it's like a JRPG or something like that, where it's like, hey, it's a really good game, but you have to like RPGs. And if you don't like RPGs, you're not going to like this game. So, it might only get like an 8 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10 or something like that, but it's definitely worth playing. Even a game I have, trauma from, Final Fantasy 13, I'm like, I think it's a game you should play. I can't give it a 10, but you should play it. Like even if you just, like Final Fantasy games, you don't like Final Fantasy games, you just like RPGs, you just like video games, like I think you should experience that game. Everybody should play Cyberpunk. It is an action role-playing game, but it is a role-playing game like modern role-playing games, where like I used to say RPGs and it used to mean like turn-based battles and stuff like that. It honestly plays more like an action game, or an open world game, an open world action game. So I would feel comfortable recommending it to people that aren't even like a huge fan of RPGs. I think role-playing mechanics are just extremely popular and easy to put in games, and they make it fun, like building your character, leveling your character. I think that's always fun. I would prefer because so you can't max out every aspect of your character. There's only so many levels you can get to, so you kind of do have to focus in on a couple categories there, which is really freaking hard for me to do because like if I find a door that I can't get into, I'm like, well, I need to be able to open doors if that ever happens again. Or you find a computer you can't hack, or there's a quest line where you have to have your intelligence or your whatever like your technical expertise is. If you don't have it maxed, you basically have to make a decision that ultimately sucks. And it's funny, Keanu Reeves, is a character in the game. He plays Johnny, which is it's funny. We didn't really get into the story too much. I feel like I could do a part 2 of this. But he's like, you're a butthole, V. V's the main character of the game, and I'm just like, dude, I didn't even want to make that decision. I just didn't have the technical expertise to like wrap up this quest line, nicely. But there's another quest line where you are working with potentially the future mayor of the main city, and it's such a crazy quest line that it literally made like I couldn't finish it because I'm like, I gotta like look into this a little bit, get some feedback without finding spoilers. Like, is there a way to accomplish like quote unquote a happy ending? And in Cyberpunk 2077, there happy endings? I don't know. There's some like more positive endings, but there's not endings to some of the big quest lines in the main story where you're just like, yes, I'm a hero, I saved the day, everything's awesome, everything's good. It's just like, man, like it's just really tough. So I'm very curious with Cyberpunk 2 because honestly they could just create all new characters and I think it would be great. Like I don't know what they're going to do. But one of the main premise of the game, and I'll kind of wrap up on this and then just hit a couple thoughts and we'll kind of wrap this up. But one of the main point of the game is the main character has somebody else's consciousness / engram downloaded into his brain, and it's starting to take over and kill him. And eventually, he is going to go away, and this other character, Keanu Reeves, Johnny, played by Keanu Reeves, is taking over. And they eventually get to a point where they're like, you have two consciousnesses, two people basically in one body, and that body is going to die, and that other person's going to be gone. And like all of his relationships that he had, all of his goals, like they're going to go away, and that person's going to take over. So they're, they kind of come to an agreement of like, we are going to help each other, and we are going to figure this out. But the main premise, and this is where if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably into video games, you're probably into technology, you're probably already utilizing artificial intelligence. And is there a soul? That's the question we got to ask ourselves. Is there something that we can't quite measure that makes a person an individual and makes a person that person? And I think that's I believe that's one of the things that we're going to experience in the next 10 years where, hey, can you download a celebrity into a program and talk to them? And is that them? Like, is that good enough for you? Like, I know everybody's like fighting this and everybody's like scared of it. And I think we should be because it's completely bizarre. But, I'm not going to be surprised if there is a company that has started, and maybe I should start this, where they take all of your photos and videos and footage and like descriptions of their personality and, anything they've created, and they, that person passes away and they offer a product where, they can send you a chip and that person's on the chip and you get to plug them into a robot body or plug them into a computer and they're back. And I think we're going to have to ask ourselves, is that what a soul is? And is that good enough? Would that bring happiness and peacefulness to those people who lost that person? It's kind of crazy to think about. So to kind of summarize, if you have a Switch 2, Cyberpunk 2077 is right now the gold standard, and like that's the baseline for me going forward for any third party games that release. They did it. Not only did it like basically launch at the time with the Switch 2, it's a high quality product. It's a high quality game. They handled the port well. And listen, I know the techie people are going to be like, well, you should be able to port a 5-year-old game to new hardware. But guess what? Sometimes developers are lazy and they don't care. Look at Borderlands 4. Look at Elden Ring. Those games already got pushed back. And Elden Ring's already a few years. It's 3 years old at this point. And like, I'm gonna be honest. Borderlands 4. They used a graphical style that benefits their inability to manage the hardware and like performance issues. So doesn't look crazy, you know what I mean? But Cyberpunk 2077, it is a game worth buying. It is currently, and hopefully, in the future, the gold standard for third-party ports. I heard that it's selling well. I couldn't find any concrete numbers, but for people like me who didn't get to experience it and they get to experience it now, even in handheld mode, I was thoroughly impressed, and the game is an absolute blast. And I'm handing over my first placed medal from Mass Effect to Cyberpunk 2077 with how I think future technology is going to look. Probably not in my lifetime. I'm not going to make it, but I think that's the method in which it's going to go and how it's going to look. So thank you for joining me. This is BigReed signing off with another episode of Gaming's Lost Memories. Just want to say thank you for listening, and be on the lookout in the coming weeks for some other cool videos. You can like it and everything like that if you would like. Like I said, this is a podcast that I do by myself, and kind of just manage and publish and everything like that myself. So if you like me talking about very specifics of video games, share it. Let other people know. That'd be cool. But thank you so much. Appreciate you listening.